properly. Okay, go ahead, Alex.
Shannan, welcome to the Open Door Sisterhood podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Well, it feels like you are sitting in my living room because I feel like you're a friend, even though we have never met face to face. So I'm very happy to have you in our space, even though it's not actual space, it's more virtual space.
Right. Well, I'm so glad to be here. And at some point, surely we will meet in person.
We will. We will. I might
it's
just
crazy that hasn't happened.
Well, anytime you're in Denver, you just tell me, and I will be chasing you down. But I may just show up in your neighborhood.
There you go. That's an option too. We're very used to people just showing up, so it's fine. Come in.
That's kind of your MO. Why don't you start by telling us about your family?
Sure.
And maybe what a typical day looks like in your life.
Yeah. So I have been married to my husband, Corey, for almost 20 years. We hit 20 years this summer. And we met in college, very similar backgrounds, and we'll probably get into some of that a little bit later on as we chat. But we do have 4 kids. They all came to us through adoption. So all 4 of our kids have really unique stories. Just like I think, everybody's story is different and special and unique. But we did adopt our 2 boys internationally from South Korea, our 2 younger boys. And then we adopted Ruby domestically and have an open adoption with her birth mom. And then our oldest son, Robert, came to us most recently, and he is almost 25. Like in a week, he has a birthday, and he was born and raised in the Chicago area and didn't come into our family until he was 19. So he's out of the house now and kind of on his own. But we live in Goshen, Indiana. It's a small city that has our whole heart, way up in northern Indiana. And we've been here for about 6 years now.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said Robert came to your family when he was 19.
Yes.
Can you adopt a 19-year-old?
You can. I mean, and you can do, yeah, you certainly can. For him, at the time that we had known him for a couple of years prior to that, when he officially became our son, he was 19 and he was in jail and was soon after sent to prison. So we walked through all of that with him. When he was released from prison about a year later, a little less than a year later, he was released to us on home detention. So he had an ankle monitor and that kind of thing. It's a little more complicated just because he also had, at that time, 2 twin baby boys. So he himself was a dad. So, he did not change his name and do that kind of thing because he's got kids of his own. So it's a really unique story, but, we are always amazed at the way God builds families, and he builds them in a whole variety of ways. Orphans come in a lot of different, from a lot of different places. I just, I'm always so aware of those verses that a lot of us have been talking about more and more, that, Jesus cares about us caring for the orphan. One of my best and closest friends who's come into my life over the past handful of years is, she's in her late 60s, but in a lot of different ways, she does not have family. And so she's become a part of our family and, a unique sort of kind of orphan. She wouldn't identify herself as that, but I just think, I hope that I never lose my ability to just see people's stories as broadly as I can.
So that really speaks to just living a life of welcome. I mean, you just are open to who would come into your life, whether that's a 19-year-old or a 60-year-old, which is amazing. That's so amazing. But I did want to ask, so you became a parent to him and a grandparent kind of all in the same motion?
Right.
So what was that like?
Well, it was interesting because when Robert was in prison, his boys were, they were not 2 yet. So they were babies. And so when Corey and I would drive to the prison to visit Robert, and we were able to do that twice a month, most of the time we would bring his boys with us because, prison is distinctly different from the jail setting in that you can physically sit in a room. For the first time when Robert was in jail, his boys could not see him or be with him. But once he was in prison, they could visit, he could hold them. He was able to start really building that relationship then. And so when he lived in our home while he was on home detention, the boys often came and stayed with him on weekends. So it was just chaos all the way around because, at that point we had a 20-year-old son parenting 2-year-old twin boys. And Robert himself he was not used to being parented himself. So now he's being parented by us. He's learning how to parent twin baby boys. I mean, if you want to be thrown into the deep end. And, it was challenging in a lot of ways. And we just had to, me especially, I had to be really hyper vigilant on what my role was, to not take over, to not over advise on parenting, to really allow him to kind of grow into that role and to just be there and be present for it. But it was a dicey season in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would think there would be a lot of self-talk of, okay, as I'm observing this, is this just culturally different?
Yeah.
Is this just a generational difference?
Right.
Is this...
Or just, does he not know?
Or does he not
know? Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's such a big, I can't imagine, my husband, Corey, he's just a wonderful man, a wonderful dad. He was raised in a very stable and loving home. But if he was 20 years old and single parenting 2-year-old twin boys, I think it would have been a struggle for him, like in the best of circumstances, that's going to be a hard thing to do. But, a lot of our story with Robert does circle back to, we experienced a lot of growth in that first year that he lived with us because it really demanded that we start to believe that our way was not the best or right way in a lot of different ways. So even in parenting, but even beyond parenting, we found that we did have this impulse to want to kind of assimilate Robert to who we are. And over and over and over again, God would kind of flip that mirror on us, and it was really difficult to come to terms with some of that and to really take a hard look at the fact that we really did believe that we knew best and that our way was the right way and that really it was the only right way. So navigating some of those, differences has just been very important and meaningful for us. And we've learned a ton about ourselves and about Robert and about God's grace and God's love, through walking through a lot of those challenging conversations and those long days.
So Shannan, I am hearing a thread in just everything you're saying. And of course, we know a part of your story as well, that you moved from, I think, a 6-acre farmhouse.
Yeah. Yep.
And into a completely different environment. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about that. But what it gets to is this bigger picture of most of us hold on to our comfort zones,
right,
and to what we know at all costs. I feel like that is just a natural human tendency that we have, is just what is known, what is comfortable. Mm-hmm. And to step out of that is really hard. And so how have you've done this several times now in lots of different ways. Yeah. How have you really become that person that's comfortable with being uncomfortable?
Yeah. I think that you hit the nail on the head that we are very, we find certainty to be a great comfort, and in particular, our own certainty. And that's how I was. And in many ways I still am, this connection, this impulse to just be so comforted and relieved by believing that I do know things. And of course there are some things that we can know, I don't want to get too deep into that. There are some things that are sure and certain and we can know, but in many cases, I've was taking my opinions about certain things, my beliefs about certain things, or even just the way I am. I was setting the default at who I am and who I was raised to be and how I was raised to live, and those certain things as being like, this is the way, the right way. Our son Robert is African American, and he in particular was raised in a pretty devastating set of circumstances as a child, and he was raised just deep into generational poverty and all of the things that are associated with that. And it's so important to take a step back. And I don't feel like I'm an expert or a pro at this. I think and I don't even think I chose it. I think we were continually kind of dumped into situations where it was just sink or swim, and we were going to have to, there was no other option but to begin to start understanding that things were not as clear, as black and white as we once thought they were. So yeah, I mean, I think the struggle is still there. I think it's something that we will always kind of wrestle with. But to be able to look at somebody, and I'll just use Robert as an example because he loves it when I talk about him in interviews or in my books or anything. He would be happy to be my example for all of this, and he would not mind me sharing. But it would be easy to look at him from the outside, from a distance, and believe that we know things about him. He has been to jail. He has been to prison. He does have children. These are all things that are true about him. But to take this step further, to look into the why, to look into, rather than, kind of condemning him from a distance on what his life looks like, to take it a step deeper and ask the question, why? Why did these certain things come to pass in his life? And even to ask ourselves why we see all of them as particularly negative, or, where we've come to a place of judgment on certain things. So I think that, as we get really close to people, especially people who we think of as being different than us in some ways, as we get really close and we look eye to eye at them, we get in their space and they get in our space, suddenly the details emerge. That's where you can see the lines on somebody's faces. That's where these issues that we may have seen from a distance that look quite simple, these are easy things to fix. And why don't people just fix it? Why don't they just do things differently? Whatever it is that we might say. When you're standing really close to somebody, those details emerge and the complexity kind of snaps into view, and it's a whole different ballgame.
It's true. It's so easy to make an issue black and white. I hate to use that term,
right. But, I know. I think sometimes in these conversations, but yes, I hear you.
But when you know somebody, suddenly it's not an issue anymore. It's a person.
That's right.
And not just understanding the why, but I think understanding the complexity of Robert. He's your son. Like, what makes him laugh, and what his favorite memory from childhood was, or what he likes for dessert on his birthday. Those are the details that make a person, and you can't fully know who they are just by knowing maybe some of the big facts of their life.
Well, and I can say, in the case of Robert, and he and I have conversations about this often, but because of his involvement in the criminal justice system, that, seeing that at close range for the first time ever really has compelled me to fight, to kind of live my life. It has informed what I write about, what I talk about, what I care about, because it's just different. When we only know what we know about a particular issue from what we read on the news or see on TV or whatever, knowing somebody who's struggling through that. And Robert was that first person. Now, because my husband is the chaplain of the county jail, we know many people kind of fighting their way out of that system or trying to. It's so important for us to spend time and to build real, enduring, loving relationships with people who are suffering and struggling, because it does build our empathy, and it does lead to compassion, and it does help us identify the things that are worth fighting for. And so I'm just tremendously grateful, as much as it's devastating to watch him still struggling through a lot of this. And I wish that I could change it and make it different. It has opened my eyes to some of the injustices that people like him face every day. And so that's been one of the things that has kind of driven me. And that happens in its most pure way when it comes out of a real living, breathing relationship with, I love what you said, like with people who, what they want for their birthday, what makes them tick, what sets them off, what has caused them pain. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what I hear as well is just that, your experience leads to opening your eyes in new ways and in fresh ways. And how would you encourage other people to do that? How would you encourage maybe those of us that have been in the same place with the same people and in the same world for a really long time? How would you encourage that shift?
Yeah. I mean, you just described the first 30 to 35 years of my life. And my husband as well. We didn't grow up near each other, but we grew up in almost identical environments where up to the point that we moved to Goshen, we lived and operated in contexts where we were surrounded almost exclusively by people who were in a lot of the key ways, they were kind of mirror images of us. We didn't have to do that hard work, or, I could say it this way. We didn't believe that we needed to do the hard work of digging deeper because everybody was just, we all agreed on everything and it was obvious and it was right. It was obviously right. So, there's a speaker and an author who I highly recommend people follow, but her name is Sandra Marie Van Opstal. And she's just she's got so much wisdom on so many of these things, and is a really powerful and pretty challenging, her message is pretty challenging and convicting. But she shared, I heard her speak recently, and she was quoting another person, but she said, "We think where our feet are standing," or something to that effect. That might be not a completely accurate paraphrase, but this idea that wherever we are standing, that's what is shaping and informing the way we see the world. So for my family, this was all made a bit easier in some ways because we were in a lot of ways kind of pretty harshly nudged out of our comfort zone in ways that we could not deny. I certainly don't feel like that is the template for everybody. I don't feel like everybody now needs to sell their farm or their house in the suburbs or whatever and move. For us, we did, and that made it a lot simpler. But I think no matter where we are, we have got to find those corners, those pockets, those areas around us where we can come into contact in a really meaningful and loving and fair way with people who are different than us. Just end of story. And so that's going to look different ways for different people. But it's vital. It is vital. We live now in a neighborhood that is low income, very immigrant rich, very politically diverse, very diverse in terms of religious practice. And it opened our eyes. It just did. I mean, when you have conversations with people who you grow to love, and you don't necessarily walk away agreeing about things that you might see as being pretty, big, important things, but you walk away realizing that you just still, you love each other no matter what. And those differences don't quite matter as much, but it allows us to see the world from a different lens. So whether we're standing with people, in our neighborhoods, or whether we're intentionally seeking out places where we can stand in different places so that our thoughts and our views and our opinions can be shaped in a truer way outside of an echo chamber. I just think that is the key.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned something that I think anybody can do, and that's reading new voices, new people, that no matter where you are, even if you feel like, well, in my community, I don't know, I live in the middle of Iowa and there's just not a lot of diversity here, but you have access to different voices in that one little step. And I know a lot of women that's been their first step to saying, I just want to understand somebody else's perspective.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge fan of that. And I would say, you know, I talk all the time about how my neighbors have changed my life, because they have. But the other thing that, you know, kind of the second step, or the part two of that, is that Twitter changed my life. And I mean that so seriously. It's, you know, it just hit me at some point, because a lot of, you know, you asked at the very beginning, Alex, and I didn't quite answer this question, but you asked what an ordinary day looks like. I mean, that's a hard question, because, you know, the ordinary is not always so ordinary. You know, a lot of times it looks like some upheaval and some chaos. And a lot of times it looks like, you know, it's winter right now in Indiana and I get to work from home. So I'm just staying inside a lot and not coming into contact with as many people as I wish I would. But even in these important neighbor relationships and friendships, we're not always like, we're not going to like tackle the tough issues when we're seeing each other in the front yard, you know? So we're building that relational equity with each other. But then I realized I could go into Twitter and really curate who I'm following and who I'm listening to learn more, to kind of get the bigger scope of, you know, criminal justice issues or immigration issues. So many of our neighbors are affected right now by what's going on with all of that. And so, you know, to be able to be friends with somebody, to walk with them, to stand with them, but to not be, you know, asking them to kind of help us understand all of this. That's not quite appropriate. But there are people on Twitter who are sharing knowledge like crazy, and it's really accessible. And I just cannot recommend enough that we are following voices who operate in a bit of a different context than we do. And like you said, reading books, you know, really intentionally choosing what we're reading. I've been super intentional over the past 6 months to read primarily people of color, to read from their perspective. And my husband is doing that as well, but he's also reading more women. I mean, he realized, it's like one of those sort of, we both are avid readers. We read constantly. He was reading mostly white men. So even for him to start reading from women's perspectives has been, you know, that's been really a good thing for both of us.
Right. It makes
I want to know for both of you who you follow on Twitter that you feel like does that well, and then maybe a book or two that you could recommend for people.
Yeah. I'm cheating and I'm pulling up my Twitter feed right now. There are so many. I mean, I would really recommend following Tasha Morrison. She does the Be the Bridge. Man, I mean, there are just, I'll keep thinking on that as I'm answering your next question. But the book that I'm reading right now that I am absolutely loving, it's so dear to my heart. And I feel like in a lot of ways, it's the perfect, I mean, I have one more chapter and then I'm going to be blabbing about it online quite a bit. Because for anybody who read and appreciated The Ministry of Ordinary Places, which is the book that I just released in September, this is the absolute perfect follow-up to that book. And it's called Church Forsaken by Jonathan Brooks. And he goes by, I'll spell it because I'll say it wrong and embarrass Robert, but he spells it Pastahj is like his Twitter handle and social media handle. But it's so good. And I also just finished and loved Drop the Stones by Carlos Rodriguez. He is a must follow on Twitter. I really appreciate following. I mean, these questions are hard because you end up leaving out so many people that you don't want to leave out, but Helen Lee.
Oh my gosh. That was like, I have to mention Helen.
Yes. Yes. I mean, you should throw out some names, Alex. I bet we follow a lot of the same people.
Well, it's funny because I was just scrolling through my Twitter and like the third person down was Tasha.
Yes.
But even just this week, Helen has been tweeting some things that I think are really important.
Yeah, she has been.
Tasha and Helen both are people who realize that they are a bridge.
Yeah.
And so they can say to a white audience, this is an important thing for you to consider as a person of color. Whereas I think other people don't understand maybe the cultural differences and they approach it from more, they're speaking to people within their own cultural group.
Yes.
That's also important to follow, but it's important to know who is speaking to me directly as a white person and who is not.
Yes.
Catherine Freeman is somebody that I met.
You met her.
Yeah.
Lucky you.
And she's going to be on the podcast. She just accepted our invitation to be on, but she was on the trip I went to at the Texas-Mexico border in August. And she, I think, is somebody who understands the political climate really well and understands the church really well. So kind of how the two
she's fantastic.
And so she's another person I would recommend.
Yeah. I mean, I would add, we could go on and on. I can send you a whole list if you want me to, and you can put it in the notes or whatever, but I would add Caitlin Curtis. I have learned so much from her, and she, many of these women and men so generously, I can't imagine the time that it takes them to educate us for free on Twitter. They're doing that work because they feel called to it, and, it's work that they want to do, and they're making that accessible. And that is the appropriate way to learn. And then buy their books, that's where I'm always like, you're doing this work for free on Twitter. The one thing I can do is buy your book, and then I can review it on Amazon. There are small ways that we can kind of give back to them, book them for our speaking events, that sort of thing. Lisa Sharon Harper, she's a must follow. I'm forgetting 1,000 people, but my Twitter feed, and I think it's important to maintain some balance, because what I found is I came out of really, really conservative political ideology. My husband and I both worked. He worked on Capitol Hill. I worked just off the Hill. We had very political jobs, very conservative. And so the danger can be, we felt like we needed to flee from that echo chamber that we were in. There is a danger of creating a new echo chamber. And so I've tried to be intentional with some of that as well, to make sure that, I'm still getting news and opinion even from a variety of sources. It's just helpful to really sort through. It's harder and harder to sort through things right now, and that makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah. I would say Austin Channing Brown's book is a good book recommendation too for people.
I have not read it yet, but just even this week again, I've thought, what in the world am I waiting on? I would love to read it.
Yeah. And so I heard her speak here in Denver when she came on book tour, and I was super excited, but I was really excited when I showed up because there were hundreds of people there. But it was one of those examples where I thought, no, I could get this at the library, but I want to support her, so I'm going to buy the book.
Yes.
And that,
it's
people tell me
$10 or around that on Amazon. Come on, we can do that.
And, people tell me all the time that they get my books from the library. Great. I want you to.
Right.
I'm cheapskate number one over here. However, when we are trying to elevate new voices that don't have access just by nature of who they are, then we can help build their platform by buying their book. So that's my plug.
Right. I agree. I think libraries are accessible. And so I love accessibility, because not everybody can buy $10 books on Amazon. I've been there and I get it. And that's part of the reason I haven't bought Austin's book yet. I keep like, okay, pretty soon. And I will. But when we can spend that money, we need to be spending that money and being really intentional about where we're spending it and, who we're spending it towards.
The whole discussion reminds me of a section that I wrote in my new book that's coming out, which we haven't really talked about on the podcast yet, about loving our neighbors. But I use our friend Ruth Olson as an example of somebody who wanted to learn about a topic because her church was getting involved in HIV ministry overseas. This was like 10, 15 years ago. And she thought, I need to be as well informed as possible as I'm helping to direct where our church's funding is going to go in this area. And so she was really intentional about finding reliable information and then people who were living with HIV. It was like that combination, just like you were talking about, like knowing your neighbors, but then also going to reliable sources to understand, because often the people couldn't answer those questions, the ones that were dealing with treatment and all of that, but they could share their stories. But she needed to understand both the macro and the micro. And so I think that's a good way to kind of approach it. Like how, if I want to learn more about a particular issue, who are the reliable news sources? And let's be honest, we have to make sure that we are getting different viewpoints and as measured information as we can and opinion as we can. And it's harder and harder to do that. But to be mindful about where you're getting your information. And then also to be mindful about, do I know real people? Do I know the hands and the feet? Because Jesus came in flesh. To show us that that's important, that to be, like you said, to be able to see the lines on the faces. He came to show us that this is the way that we touch and hold and care for people and wipe their tears and hug them when they're crying. That in this digital age, it can become easier and easier to forget that. And so I like that dualness of it.
I mean, what that tells us is that all of this matters. It matters that we are just spending time, whether it's virtually, whether it's in somebody's books, whether it's face to face. I mean, that we are being very intentional. And I like what you said too about just, making sure that we're gathering the right information, gathering the right voices to be listening to and learning from. For me, part of that is the fact that I am a white woman raising African-American and Korean kids, and really we live in an area that is very heavily Latino, and my two Asian boys they're always like, where are the other Asians? They would love to have, and whenever we find local Korean people, we kind of like latch on to them and, force them into friendship. But that's another thing that just, we can be learning. It's very important for me to be learning from other Koreans and other Korean Americans and, to help navigate, just raising my kids, just to even, so I think of Kathy Kong. She's somebody that I follow on Twitter who's just been so helpful. I don't know. There's just something to the fact that we live in, for all the guff we give social media, that it just ruins everything. And it's, we live in a day and age where we get to pick, and that can be dangerous, but it can also be really healthy to get to sort of pick who we're listening to and learning from. And it can look so many different ways, and it can benefit us in so many different ways as well. But yeah, I personally am just so grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. Shannan, I'd like to camp in your book for a little bit and talk about just what have been some of the most interesting responses that you've received. Like what do you think is really striking a chord with people?
Just in general with the book you're saying?
Yeah.
I think this is the right time for this book and for this message. And even, Alex, what you're working on. I mean, this just feels like the right time to be talking about neighboring. And it's funny because when I set out to write this book, I knew that it was going to be like, so much of my life is about neighboring and is even just spent thinking about what it means to live as a neighbor. I knew that probably the word neighbor wasn't going to be part of my title, but I knew also that the book was mostly going to be about neighbors.
Right.
But there's always that feeling of, this is what was happening within me and in my life, but it's hard to know if it's going to hit the right place once it's out in the public view. And, you hope that it will. And not just because you're trying to sell books, but because you believe in it. I mean, I believe that our relationships and our neighbors and the way we lay down our lives for the people around us, I believe that is intended to change us. I believe that's a gift to us. But it's been really very exciting to see that they seem to be really ready to take this a little bit deeper and to get a little bit more serious about finding meaningful connection with the people around them. And so part of that, I think, is kind of a backlash against, this thing that we're always balancing out with, our online social media lives, which are valuable and important, as we've just spent a lot of time talking about that. But then there's also this sense of like, it's an empty Saturday night and I want to have somebody over for dinner. Who are going to be the people that start to fill in the blank spaces in our regular, ordinary lives? I would say that they can very much be the people who are just right within within your field of vision right now. And so it takes that work of, getting to that place where you can interact in those ways and build those relationships. And, I always say, building relationships, the fact that we use that phrase, building relationships, implies that it's going to be hard work. It's not going to happen easily. It's not going to be supernatural. It might be pretty awkward and it might be very slow, and it might, you might have some failures and some disappointments along the way. But yeah, I mean, I think there's so much tension swirling up in the atmosphere. That's what I was feeling when I set out to write this book, when I was even just in the initial stages of outlining it and that kind of thing. I found myself, and I'm a person who tends to be very, I'm kind of good in a crisis. I don't tend to I'm not real anxious. I'm kind of unflappable in some of those ways. And I was starting to feel pretty anxious. And so I was starting to feel like these problems are too big. We are never going to be able to fix these problems. And almost even veering into a little bit of the, like, I give up. What is the point? Why bother? Every time I really got to that breaking point of feeling like, well, this is just a disaster, I'm just going to go take a nap and forget about this. The solution was always to get very low to the ground, to come back to my place, my neighborhood. I keep looking out the windows because right now as we're talking, I'm seeing the houses of my neighbors. I'm watching my neighbors come and go. But to get very near to the ground where I live and to pay attention, to open my eyes and start looking around and finding those people nearby who I could love and be loved by. And a lot of times the really big issues swirling in the air that feel impossible, we find them represented right where we are in maybe smaller ways, but that's where change really comes, I think, is when we all get a little to a lot more intentional about really noticing what's happening right where we are.
Mm-hmm. I really think it can change our country. I really do.
For sure.
It can. If we all pay attention to the people right within arm's reach, if everybody did that a little better with a little more intentionality, because it is going to be hard. And I like that you said it's not easy. That's the thing, is we want it to be easy, and it's easy to post something on social media and to comment and to close the computer or whatever it is. That is easy. But what's hard is sitting with someone who's in pain, who, I mean, often our neighbors just living in the city are people who don't have access to a shower. I mean, there are some things that are unique to where you live.
Right.
But pain is universal.
Right.
So no matter what your neighborhood situation is, whether you're living in an apartment building in a city or out in the country, you have neighbors who would love for you to make eye contact and to not be rushed and to sit with you for a while. And
that's right.
That, if we all did that a little better, I truly believe that the tension that we feel, because it's true, we're all feeling it, wouldn't go away 100%, but it would go down.
I'm giving you a virtual high five. on all of that.
Well, I mean, we both have written books this year about this because it's important.
Well, and we've both written books about it because we have seen the way it has changed us. Mm-hmm. You know, it sounds a little cliche to say this, but I think cliches come from a place often of real truth. You know, if we all found that one person, my life and my context makes it easy to connect with a whole variety of people, and sometimes more people than we know what to do with. But I think of myself, you know, where I lived 10 years ago or 8 years ago, and I was kind of out in the middle of nowhere, you know, surrounded by soybean fields. And, you know, I just didn't come across as many people on a day-to-day basis. But if we, even then, finding one person, because making the world better for one person makes the world better. That's by virtue, you know, so, and in the meantime, we ourselves are being made better through that relationship. And so this has just kind of this snowball, this exponential reward effect happening where, you know, we're all moving closer to each other. And it doesn't have to be selling the farm and moving to the city and, you know, spending most of your time with people who are incarcerated or suffering through addiction. It doesn't have to be that. It can be. And I hope for more of us it is that, you know, because the need is there. But finding that person who might be challenging in any number of ways, especially initially, and to just, you know, to decide that you're in it for the long haul, that this is your neighbor and this is your neighbor for a reason. You've been put where you're put with intention, and just kind of committing to that, I think. Just kind of committing to, this is where I am, you know, whatever that looks like for the different people listening. This is where I am right now. And there's a reason. So I'm going to, until I hear otherwise, I'm going to be all in right here. That makes the world better, for sure.
I love this. Shannan, it's so inspiring, honestly. Like, I just want you to hear and to know, I mean, you are inspiring so many of us, and Alex and I included. So thanks for just being you and just doing what you're doing and really just being obedient to God's call in your life. Because ultimately that's what it is that obedience to growth and change and getting uncomfortable. Yeah. And I think that is just a good message for all of us. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, okay. So we want to end the interview today with just some practicals, because I really look at you and how much you write and just all of the things that you do. And I think, and you're just doing all this neighboring and all this, you know, relationship building. So what are some things just that make your life practically better? Like, what are some things you couldn't live without that you use every day to kind of make all of this work?
Well, hot tea and yoga pants.
Amen. I'm all in on both of those.
I find myself even in book writing, like, okay, everybody knows that I pretty much live in yoga pants. I can probably stop talking about that now, but they do seem to be a big part of my life.
Which tea do you love? And what yoga pants do you love?
I am, you know, people send me and have been sending me, and this is a good problem to have, but my favorite variety of tea is Earl Grey. And so sometimes people send me fancy Earl Grey, and some of the fancy Earl Grey I really love, and some of it is too fancy for me. But my go-to is just Bigelow. I have some right here in front of me. You buy it at Kroger or wherever you get groceries. It's like $3 a box, and I'm stuck on it. It's perfect. It's not too flowery. It's perfect.
I love Earl Grey too.
It's so good. I'm not a coffee drinker, so that's my caffeine every day.
I've been noticing your mug this entire interview. Where did you get that mug? I love it so much.
Well, it says, you know, it's very off-brand of me. I'm kidding when I say that. But, you know, the cover of my book has all the mugs on it, and these are my mugs, and they are all from the thrift store. So I paid probably 50 cents for most of them. I do have 2 mugs that are from Anthropology. And one of them.
No wonder. I love it.
It's beautiful. It says tea. Like, tea drinkers are never catered to us poor, oppressed teenagers.
It's so true, Shannan. I'm so with you on that.
When you see a mug at Anthro that says tea on it and it's in the clearance room, you buy the tea mug. So yeah,
yes,
that's not one of my thrift store mugs, but it is really pretty. The other thing that I would say for me that keeps me really sane, the thing that keeps me the most sane is spending time in person with my neighbors and the people around me. That is the most grounding. They are my world, my family and the people around me. I always like to say that, that's like neighboring and just being a person, being Shannan Martin in my neighborhood. That's my life. And then my side hustle is that I write about it. But I think it can be easy in this field of work to get kind of caught up in this online activity. And it can be dangerous. It can be unhealthy. And the solution for me always is to be super, super invested in my world. So as an example, I came directly from popcorn day this morning I came home for this interview. So I spent my morning popping popcorn with 2 other members of PTO, saying hi to the kids, saying hi to the teachers. I will smell like popcorn for the rest of the day. That's just part of the deal. But finding ways to just be very invested where I am in very ordinary ways. And when I showed up to popcorn day today, I had my hair done and some makeup on, and my friend Jess was like, "Where are you going after this?" Because they usually see me in my yoga pants with my baseball hat on.
I know. Isn't that funny? Oh my gosh. We live such parallel lives in so many ways, Shannan, but I just have this constant dialogue in my head of humility. In order to ground myself, and I wouldn't say I really struggle with pride, but to remember that God knows what's going on in my head and my heart. And he knows if I'm stopping and talking to my neighbor, for example, in the driveway who needs a hello, or the church secretary, or the person at the grocery store that looks like they might need help to their car. He cares about those things.
Yeah.
He probably cares about my Twitter interaction because he wants me to be kind and loving, but really he is paying attention to those things. And that's the life I need to answer to. Right.
Well, right. And I would say not only is he paying attention to that, I don't want to overstate this because I run the risk of doing that, but I do think he's bringing these opportunities to us. He is giving us these gifts of inconvenience sometimes, and he's giving us the gifts of overwhelm sometimes, and just feeling like, I don't have time for this right now. As we've been talking, one of my neighbors who tends to knock on my door often, and often it's not a short encounter. Often it's going to be a long conversation, maybe a somewhat stressful conversation, but she just walked by my front windows and I was sitting here thinking like, oh, she didn't. But, those are the things that we navigate. And that's not to say that it's never appropriate to say, I can't right now. I can't talk right now. But I do think for me, it's been, I think I for sure struggle with pride in different ways. And I think you're right. I think, keeping things as humble as we can for all of us is just the way forward. But I do think that there, part for me of balancing the pride that I could feel, where a lot of times I just feel like, well, this is how people know me. I'm supposed to be doing all the things with all the neighbors at all times. I mean, that's not true either. And so part of the humility and humbling for me is saying no, and is not getting too caught up in, what am I supposed to be doing? I have seen that acquaintances often cross over into friends when I say no. That in some ways sets the tone and there are people who come to us needing things often. And so if there's a particular person who's coming to me asking for things and I don't begrudge that. A lot of times it's just a ride. But if they're coming and asking for a ride and I'm like, sure, I can give you a ride. Sure, I can give you a ride. The time that I say, I can't do it today. I mean, that just has a way of kind of putting things into balance pretty quickly. And then it's a situation where they know that I'm going to say yes when I can. And they know that I'm going to say no when I can't. They know that I'm going to ask them for help if I need to. That's what real friendship and real ordinary everyday love, I think, can look like.
It makes your yes stronger.
Yeah.
Because then they know.
It builds trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I shouldn't say that I don't struggle with pride. That's the silly thing to say.
But I know what you mean. I mean, I don't think that it's not like, my biggest struggle, right? Yeah. I have other bigger struggles, but I think
maybe that's what I should say. I have bigger struggles.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think humanity on the whole,
right.
I think we all have some baseline pride issues somewhere.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. The fact that I said that shows I have some pride. So
there we go.
I love it.
Okay, Shannan, what about a favorite family tradition?
We are not like a super structured tradition-y family. And I get this question now and then, and I'm always like, wait, do we have traditions? We do, but they're not very official. I would say my favorite tradition, whenever it can happen, is just a slow Saturday morning where we don't have to be anywhere. We can stay in our pajamas half the day, if not all day. I really, one of my coping mechanisms is baking and cooking, spending time in the kitchen. So, if I can make something special that morning, and just walk around in our cozy socks, and that for me is like a rhythm that's pretty important for our family. And when we go too long without having that, and we're really pretty protective of it. But I feel it when we don't have that. And, we like to explore and do day trips and that kind of thing, but I would say that's the most meaningful.
Okay. So on the subject of cooking, I know you're a cook, so we need some, we need some favorite recipes.
I cannot even begin to give you my favorite recipes because I just love all food. I'm the least picky eater you will ever meet. I eat and love everything. So I'll just tell you what I've cooked lately.
Okay.
I just made yesterday Joanna Gaines banana bread.
Oh, and people have talked about
delicious.
That.
It's delicious, and it was super easy to make. And I just thought, why don't I do this more often? It was just so simple. And I've been enjoying that last night and today.
With the tea.
With my tea and, generous butter on the bread. I have one of my family's favorite wintry soup recipes is a cheesy, I forget what I call it. I've made up some random name for it, but it's a cheesy broccoli cauliflower soup.
Oh, yeah.
Almost like a chowder type of thing. And so when it's snowing right now, when it gets snowy, that tends to be one of the things that I'm eager to make. And then I also recently discovered through my sister-in-law a crock pot sweet potato curry. We like a lot of Asian inspired stuff or Asian influenced stuff. And it's so easy. It's just, these are just recipes that I've kind of stumbled upon online. It's fantastic and so easy, and everybody loves it. And then my all-time favorite recipe in the world is my salsa recipe.
You have on your website, right?
Yes, I do. And the cheesy vegetable soup is on there as well. I can get that link to you if that would be helpful. But yes, the salsa, I mean, not to brag, but I did win my category in our citywide salsa contest 2 years ago.
That counts. I mean, blue ribbons count.
I felt like it mattered. I felt like it was a big moment for me. I was a little, I was up against all these different people, and a lot of the people were Latino women. So I was like, well, I'm not going to win, and I don't want to win. But I won the mild category. So I felt like that was like
the white girl version.
Yeah, it's not really salsa. We'll give that to the white girl. You know, the Latinas just swept all of the other categories because they're amazing, and I get to partake of their salsa, you know, whenever I can, I do. But yeah, I love chips and salsa. It's my favorite.
That's so fun. Okay, do you have well, I'm going to look on the recipe, but do you have like a secret ingredient that you think really makes it?
In the salsa?
Uh-huh.
I believe in a lot of lime in my salsa. And here's the interesting thing. The judges' notes on my salsa said that they loved that it was the most fresh tasting. And my salsa uses canned tomatoes. And so that like
it's the
blows
lime.
everybody's mind. It blows everybody's mind. And the beauty of it is you can make it year round, baby. I mean, it's never out of season.
So is that like whole tomatoes that you chop, or like the rotel already chopped with the chilies in it?
It's both. It's one can of rotel. It's kind of a riff on Pioneer Woman's restaurant style salsa. I think I started with hers, and then I just keep adding more lime and more garlic and more cumin. I mean, I think those are all. I like salt in my I like a little bit of saltiness in my salsa. So yeah, you can start with hers, and I like mine. The more I eat salsa and the more I become obsessed with Mexican food, the more spicy I like it. So I do think my palate is changing a little bit. I like it hotter than I used to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I love that we're still talking about salsa. It's amazing. I'm so hungry.
I could camp here a really long time, so we better cut it off. But well, Shannan, thank you so much. We absolutely love what you do and who you are, and we just love having you a part of the sisterhood.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shannan. Next time in my living room.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Let's do it.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Have a good day.